Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening. And so there have been several attempts that I've made to bring about the issue of this video. And as the title reads, Sensationalizing Gun Violence in Media. And so here you see the Time magazine's pictured the five students, and it says enough. The five students that were involved in the they were classmates of the victims, the 17 victims involved in the Parkland shooting massacre. And so this article here is AOL dot, I guess, AOL dot. And so under Huffington Post, that is attached to it that talks about it reads Fed Up Parkland Students Featured on Time magazine cover. And so I'm going to read this article and then I will explain my position on this whole thing. So the Time magazine's new cover features survivors of February's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School mass shooting who organized this weekend's March for Our Lives protest for stronger gun laws in Washington and other cities. So it reads enough, and that's what the headlines are superimposed over the cross arms of Parkland senior Emma Gonzalez, now a recognizable face in the fight for gun control, thanks in part to an impassioned speech in the days after the shooting and her trademark buzz cut hair. The cover also features her outspoken fellow students Jacqueline Corin, Alex Wynn, Cameron Caskey, and David Hogg. And so as I pan down, you'll see the Time cover with all of the students that I named. And one of the students here has her shoes off. And you see the one student, Emma Gonzalez, in the front with the buzz haircut that we're referring to, with the torn, the ripped jeans. Very stylish looking. And it says enough. Very stylish looking pose. So the five students have publicly demanded that lawmakers make policy changes to keep schools safe since a gunman armed with an assault-style rifle attacked their South Florida high school February 14th. And so here's, I believe, a video of Emma Gonzalez. It's faint, you may not can see it, but it's Time's new cover. The school shooting generation has had enough. And so there's a video with that. And so it's really caught on. And these kids are looked at as heroes, and they're outspoken, and they're very trendy. They're young. And it looks as though, from looking at the cover of the magazine, if you really pay attention, you look at how they're dressed and how they're standing there, that they have really serious looks on their faces, but from the way they're standing, one of the girls has no shoes on. It looks as though there's a fashionable pose. And how many times have we looked at magazines like the Vogue and Guess, Jeans and In Vogue and all these magazines where people are fashionably posed in much the same way. And so I'm not saying that what these kids are doing is wrong, but what I'm saying is media has sensationalized this whole issue surrounding the gun debate. And so these kids, they're not really thinking they're doing anything wrong. They are thinking they're doing the greater good for humanity, and they have a lot of hopes and dreams and courage, and they probably are speaking out to try to persuade better reforms on the whole issue surrounding guns. But media is eating this up. It is a total media circus, and people who are have issues of being violent, they're unhinged, they're not really in touch with reality. They look at this and say, wow, if they are young and impressionable and they can be sensationalized on the cover of a magazine for an issue like this in this way, what about copycats? And so it has actually sparked such a frenzy that even the bad people who are out there who don't care or have regard for other human lives have latched on to this issue and started to copy all of the negativity and all of the bad people who have pretty much victimized or pretty much put people in fear and incited fear in schools and in churches and what's other organizations that you would think would be safe havens or safe zones. And so this is really sad. Also, I wanted to add there's other communities where there are poor people, poor working class, or simply because they're in a community where it's high crime, high drugs, and it's African American, that there are a few people that are good people that will try to speak out, and they're in fear of their lives, but they take a risk and speak out on behalf of community members, but they're never placed on the cover of magazines such as these kids. They're Black youth who have spoken out against violence in their communities, and they're never looked and viewed at as these kids are viewed at. They're never given a stage, they're never given a voice, they're never allowed to speak out, and if they do speak out, they always find people who are not really able to converse for themselves and fight for their community effectively because they have some specific intellectual challenges, or they don't know who to talk to or whom to talk to or how to get their messages across effectively. And so this is not really turning me on here. What it's doing is actually made matters worse because it's created a media circus, so much so that bad people see this and say, well, if they can get recognition for doing this, how much recognition could I get for doing something negative? And that is the way bad people see this. And so they look at this as, oh, they're getting their 10, 20, whatever minutes or whatever days of fame. So other people are latching on to this frenzy and it's catching on like wildfire. So last week, their efforts inspired students across the nation to walk out of their classrooms to protest the gun violence. So students at many schools observed 17 minutes of silence in honor of the 17 people who were killed in the Parkland shooting. Over the past month, these students have become the central organizers of what may turn out to be the most powerful grassroots gun reform movement in nearly 2 decades, wrote Times Charlotte Alter for the magazine cover story. For much of the rest of the country, numbed and depressed by repeated mass shootings, the question has become, can these kids actually do it? So they may or they may not, or it may latch on for a while and we may have this media frenzy and it may become just like the Columbine. Once everything quiets down, it goes back to the way it was. And then you have all these kids who are sensationalized behind this. They're getting commercials, they're on TV, they're 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 getting recognition in other areas, but there's no push for the gun reform as strong as it was when the initial incident actually occurred. And so there are neighborhoods that are in poor communities where kids are without resources or have very limited resources. And you have few kids who will speak out, or several kids who will speak out, but they may not be white, they may be black, they may be poor, they may be kids that are in neighborhoods that have been kind of thrown aside or forgotten about. There's not much funding, not much care. It's over policed and it's riddled with drug issues and a lot of gun violence. And they see this, what these kids seen that one time on February 14th. There are kids living in situations where they see that constantly. And there are people that have spoken out in the past about similar issues such as this, and their voices had not been heard. And they sure definitely hadn't been placed on the cover of magazine of Times for their efforts have been thwarted, or they've been viewed as rejects or throwaways simply because they don't look the part. And so this is how I'm saying this. I don't feel like this actually is promoting the stopping of gun violence. It's actually encouraging it. Actually, gun sales will shoot up and you'll have more crazy people who don't have regard for human life look at this and become copycats or be turned on to become extremely violent to get their press and media coverage, to be known as somebody that's significant, even if they go down in history as somebody that has taken lives, innocent lives away. And so it actually is creating more problems with this sensationalization of the whole issue. And so I'm just saying that I know this may not come off as well for some, and some may agree. They may say, yeah, I feel like there's too much sensationalization. So if you look at some of the things in the past that have been sensationalized based on tragedies, such as, for example, if even though it isn't a school shooting, Charles Manson, right now his estate, all that stuff, who's going to be the heir, who's going to get what, he's sensationalized. After that horrible incident that happened so many years ago, he's looked at and revered as somebody extremely important. He's going to go down in history. He's going to be always in the history books. It may be a negative, but it's a positive in other people's eyesight because they sensationalized him. And so that's what I'm saying about this issue, that they sensationalize violence, they sensationalize guns. And some neighborhoods, there are people who are not worried about background checks. They're not worried about gun reform because guns are being pretty much left in their communities because they're able to access, and there's ghost guns. And then there's people that are in communities where they get guns through the black market. So this will not affect that from happening. It'll actually ramp things up. And so I'm not turned on by this type of stuff here. It actually makes things worse because you have people looking at this thinking, okay, I'm going to be even more sensationalized, but I'm going to be on the other side of the coin. And that's the way the copycat type folks view it. And so there are people that are bad out there. There was a school today that it's a middle school, and it was at Pacoima Middle School, I believe, and they were on lockdown. I don't know what the developments were from that issue. Hopefully they got it under control, but it has sparked this frenzy all over the country behind this one incident and these kids being pretty much plastered on every cover. It hasn't made things better in the eyes of other individuals who look at this as an opportunity to get their 5 minutes of fame. So this is what I'm saying about this. Like, comment, and subscribe on this issue, and thank you for listening.